the story of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in the sphere of world politics is one of intrigue, rivalry, mutual fascination, and a constant dance between cooperation and confrontation. To understand their political history is to step into a narrative that stretches across decades, weaving together the ambitions of a real estate mogul turned American president and a former KGB officer who rose to command one of the most powerful nations on earth. Their history is not just about two men, but about two countries, two worldviews, and two very different approaches to power that collided and entangled in the 21st century. Long before Trump took office in 2017, his name had already echoed across Moscow's elite circles. The 1980s and 1990s were decades when Donald Trump, still known primarily as a brash businessman and media figure, expressed admiration for Russia, then the Soviet Union. He often mused about the potential of US-Russia relations and made no secret of his interest in expanding his real estate empire into Moscow. There were whispers of deals, talks of Trump Towers rising in the heart of Russia's capital, and negotiations that nearly came to fruition. The Soviet Union's collapse opened doors for Western businessmen, and Trump was never shy about exploring the possibility, though the deals never materialized. His admiration for Russia's potential stayed with him. Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, was moving on a very different trajectory. While Trump was climbing the ladders of celebrity and wealth, Putin was stationed in Dresden as a KGB officer in the late 1980s, watching as the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Empire unraveled. He experienced firsthand the humiliation of a collapsing state, the sense of betrayal and decline that came with the disintegration of a superpower. By the time Trump was negotiating hotel contracts and appearing on magazine covers, Putin was maneuvering within the remnants of Soviet power, eventually making his way into Russian politics through the 1990s. Putin rose quickly under Boris Yeltsin, becoming prime minister in 1999 and then president by the end of that year. His mission was clear: restore Russia's pride, rebuild its strength, and reassert its influence in the world. While Trump was cementing his reputation as a New York real estate icon and later as a television personality with The Apprentice, Putin was centralizing power, taming oligarchs, and reshaping Russia into a nation led by his iron grip. For years, the two men orbited in separate spheres. Trump in American celebrity, culture and business, Putin in the hardened corridors of Kremlin power. But their paths began to draw closer as the global order shifted. In the 2000s, Trump frequently commented on international affairs in interviews. He was outspoken about America's role in the world, critical of wars in the Middle East, and occasionally expressed admiration for strong leaders abroad. Putin's image, often projected as the strongman restoring Russia, caught Trump's attention. When Trump announced his candidacy for president in 2015, Putin had already been at the helm of Russia for over 15 years, alternating between president and prime minister to stay within constitutional limits while never loosening his control. The United States and Russia had seen their relations strained, particularly after Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the subsequent sanctions imposed by the Obama administration. Putin was painted as an aggressor in Western media, a man intent on reshaping Europe's borders by force. While in Russia, he was celebrated as the protector of Russian-speaking people and the man who restored national pride. Trump's candidacy came with unorthodox positions. He questioned NATO, criticized traditional alliances, and suggested that the United States should seek better relations with Russia. Unlike many politicians who took hard stances against Moscow, Trump spoke openly of his desire to get along with Putin. His remarks stood out in the political landscape of Washington, where skepticism toward Russia had been the norm for decades. Putin, for his part, responded in kind, referring to Trump as colorful and talented, though Western media often interpreted his words as brilliant. This exchange of compliments sparked endless speculation. Was there a bond forming between the American outsider candidate and the Russian leader? The 2016 U.S. presidential election would push this relationship to the center of world attention. As Trump campaigned, intelligence agencies in the United States began reporting on Russian interference efforts, disinformation campaigns, and social media manipulation designed, they said, to influence the outcome of the election. Putin's government denied direct involvement, but suspicions grew that the Kremlin favored Trump over Hillary Clinton. Clinton had been openly critical of Putin, while Trump's remarks suggested a willingness to reset relations. When Trump won the election in November 2016, shockwaves rippled across the globe. Many saw it as not only a political upset, but also as a moment that could redefine U.S.-Russia relations. Putin was one of the first world leaders to congratulate Trump, sending a message of goodwill and expressing hope for improved relations. The world watched with fascination and apprehension. Would Trump's presidency mark a new era of U.S.-Russia cooperation, or would it devolve into suspicion and conflict? Trump entered office in January 2017, under the cloud of investigations. The U.S. intelligence community had concluded that Russia interfered in the election. Questions about Trump's connections to Russia dominated headlines. The so-called Steele dossier, filled with unverified claims about Trump's ties to Moscow, fueled controversy and speculation. For Trump, this became a source of fury. He denied collusion, called the investigations a witch hunt, and insisted that his desire for better relations with Putin was about diplomacy, not secret alliances. Despite the storm, the two leaders' interactions became headline events. Their first major meeting took place at the G20 summit in Hamburg. In 2017, cameras captured their handshake, their smiles, and the seemingly cordial tone of their exchange. To Trump's critics, it was proof of a troubling closeness. To his supporters, it was evidence that Trump was willing to step outside the usual confrontational posture toward Russia. Throughout Trump's presidency, the relationship with Putin was marked by contradictions. On one hand, Trump often praised Putin personally, describing him as a strong leader and questioning why the United States couldn't get along with Russia. On the other hand, his administration approved sanctions, expelled diplomats, and provided military aid to Ukraine. Critics argued that, while Trump's words seemed friendly, U.S. policy under his administration was not particularly soft on Russia. This duality, Trump's rhetoric versus the actions of his government, became a defining feature of their political history. One of the most scrutinized moments came in July 2018. In Helsinki, Trump and Putin held a joint press conference after a private meeting. Standing beside Putin, Trump publicly questioned the findings of his own intelligence agencies regarding Russian election interference. President Putin says, "It's not Russia. I don't see any reason why it would be," Trump remarked. The statement ignited a firestorm in the United States. Politicians from both parties condemned him, accusing him of siding with a foreign adversary over his own country's institutions. For Putin, the moment was seen as a diplomatic victory. For Trump, it was one of the most controversial episodes of his presidency. Their political history is not just about meetings and headlines. It reflects deeper dynamics. Trump's style, brash and unorthodox, often clashed with the cautious and calculated demeanor of Putin, yet both shared similarities. They were nationalists. They thrived on projecting strength, and they relished in defying global elites. Each man had a base of supporters, who saw them as defenders of their nations against hostile establishments. In this way, Their histories ran parallel, even as their countries' interests diverged. As Trump's presidency continued, US-Russia relations remained tense. Sanctions persisted, NATO remained wary, and Russia continued its assertive policies abroad. Putin, ever the strategist, seemed to view Trump as both an opportunity and a challenge. While Trump's words were friendlier than those of past presidents, American institutions, Congress, the military, intelligence agencies ensured that Russia still faced pushback. The promise of a full reset never materialized. When Trump lost the 2020 election to Joe Biden, Putin delayed his congratulations, waiting weeks before acknowledging Biden's victory. Trump's departure from the White House ended a turbulent chapter in US-Russia relations. For Putin, it meant dealing once again with a more traditional American leader, one who promised to hold Russia accountable. For Trump, it meant returning to the role of political outsider. Though his history with Putin remained a defining part of his presidency's legacy, the political history of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin is layered with irony. Despite all the speculation about secret deals, collusion, and backroom friendships, the reality is more complex. Trump admired Putin's strength and often spoke positively about him, yet his administration took actions that constrained Russia. Putin, for his part, seemed to welcome Trump's rhetoric, but still faced resistance from the American system. Their story illustrates how much international politics is shaped, not just by leaders, but by the institutions, pressures, and realities that surround them. Even after Trump left office, the echoes of his relationship with Putin continued. Commentators debated whether Trump had been too soft, whether Putin had manipulated him, or whether the media exaggerated the closeness. Meanwhile, Trump's supporters insisted that his approach to Russia avoided direct conflict and kept the world from sliding into greater instability. Putin, ever pragmatic, shifted his focus to Biden, but the memory of Trump remained as part of his political calculations. Their history is not finished. Trump continues to wield influence in American politics, and Putin remains at the helm of Russia. The possibility of their paths crossing again, should Trump return to power, lingers in the background of global affairs. What is clear is that the political history of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin will be studied for decades. An extraordinary tale of two men, two nations, and a relationship that defined an era of uncertainty in world politics. As the years passed after Trump's departure from the White House, the question of his legacy in relation to Vladimir Putin and Russia did not fade into obscurity. Instead, it became one of the most fiercely debated subjects in modern political discourse. For Trump's critics, the relationship symbolized a dangerous weakness, an openness to manipulation by a cunning adversary, who had long sought to divide Western democracies. For his defenders, it symbolized pragmatism, a recognition that endless hostility between Washington and Moscow served neither side, and that Trump's willingness to engage Putin directly was a bold step toward realism in foreign policy. The origins of their strange political dance lay deeper than simple diplomacy. Trump's personal admiration for Putin seemed to stem from more than just geopolitical calculation. He saw in Putin qualities he admired: strength, decisiveness, and an ability to project dominance on the world stage. For a man like Trump, who valued image as much as substance, Putin's carefully cultivated aura as a strongman resonated. Trump often contrasted Putin's demeanor with that of other world leaders, describing many of America's allies as weak or indecisive, while Putin, in his eyes, embodied toughness. But admiration did not necessarily translate into true partnership. The structures of American power, Congress, the intelligence community, the military establishment remained skeptical of Russia. Regardless of Trump's personal feelings, sanctions against Moscow expanded during his tenure. Russian diplomats were expelled. American forces continued to strengthen NATO's eastern flank. The irony was that Trump's rhetoric gave the impression of a friendlier stance toward Putin, but his government's actual policies were far from conciliatory. This contradiction became one of the most fascinating aspects of their political history, words and actions, pulling in different directions. For Putin, the Trump years were a time of opportunity, mixed with frustration. He observed an American president who questioned NATO and criticized the European Union positions that aligned with Russia's interests. At the same time, Putin faced an American state apparatus that remained hostile. Trump's unpredictability created openings, but also risks. Putin was a strategist, accustomed to playing the long game, while Trump thrived on shock, spectacle, and short-term victories. Their styles intersected in unexpected ways, sometimes aligning, other times colliding. The Helsinki summit of 2018 remained a pivotal moment, a symbolic climax of their relationship. Putin entered the meeting with confidence, knowing that the spectacle of standing beside an American president willing to publicly question his own intelligence agencies was itself a geopolitical win. Trump, eager to display his deal-making prowess, seemed to believe he could charm Putin into cooperation. The result was an event that inflamed Washington, but reinforced Moscow's narrative of American division. For historians, Helsinki became a shorthand for the complexity of Trump-Putin politics, a stage where perception and reality blurred. Beneath the surface, their relationship was shaped by domestic needs as much as international strategy. Trump faced constant investigations, from the FBI to Robert Mueller's special counsel probe, all examining possible Russian connections. Though Mueller's report did not establish that Trump colluded with Moscow, it detailed extensive Russian interference efforts, feeding the narrative that Putin had played a hand in Trump's rise. For Trump, this was a wound that never healed. He railed against the Russia hoax, insisting that the accusations were lies designed to undermine his presidency. For Putin, the investigations served as a reminder that even when an American president seemed open to better relations, the deeper machinery of US politics was beyond his control. The tension between perception and reality was constant. When Trump praised Putin as a strong leader, commentators speculated about hidden loyalties. When Trump's administration approved sanctions or military aid to Ukraine, critics argued that it was Congress forcing his hand. Putin himself remained measured in his public comments about Trump, rarely straying into overt praise, but always emphasizing the need for dialogue and respect between the two nations. This restraint served him well. It kept alive the possibility of cooperation, while avoiding the appearance of favoritism. As Trump's presidency approached its end, the shadow of Russia still loomed large. The 2020 election brought new warnings of interference, though this time the focus shifted to broader disinformation efforts, rather than direct hacking of political organizations. Trump's refusal to concede defeat after losing to Joe Biden created chaos in the United States. But for Putin, it was another demonstration of America's internal fragility. The Kremlin watched as America grappled with division, while Trump's supporters continued to insist that he was a victim of a rigged system. After leaving office, Trump did not disappear from the stage. His continued influence over the Republican Party kept the possibility of a return alive, and with it, speculation about a renewed chapter in his political history with Putin. Commentators asked, if Trump were to return to power, would he seek a grand bargain with Russia, a sweeping deal to redefine relations, or would the weight of institutions again constrain him? For Putin, such questions were not idle musings, but practical considerations. The Kremlin always planned for multiple scenarios, and Trump's enduring popularity in American politics meant that he could not be ignored. The story of Trump and Putin is also the story of two different kinds of power. Trump's power rested on charisma, populist appeal, and a disruptive approach to politics. He thrived on rallies, on television appearances, on dominating news cycles. His was a performative power, deeply tied to image and perception. Putin's power, by contrast, was rooted in control over institutions, media, security services, and the levers of the Russian state. Where Trump sought to bend public opinion to his will, Putin ensured that opposition was marginalized or eliminated before it could threaten him. These differences defined how each approached the world and, by extension, how they approached one another. Yet, for all their differences, they shared certain traits. Both distrusted the globalist order that had dominated after the Cold War. Both criticized international institutions when those institutions threatened their goals. Both cultivated images as outsiders who defied elites. Putin as the man who resurrected Russia from chaos. Trump as the businessman who stormed Washington. This parallel made their political histories intertwine in the eyes of the world, even when their direct interactions were limited. In many ways, their relationship became less about actual agreements and more about symbolism. To Trump's detractors, every smile and handshake with Putin symbolized betrayal. To his supporters, it symbolized strength and independence. To Putin's allies, Trump's openness to dialogue was proof that Russia could no longer be ignored. To Putin's critics inside Russia, it was evidence of his ability to manipulate foreign leaders. Thus, the narrative around their relationship often carried more weight than the tangible policies that emerged from it. As the 2020s unfolded, Russia's actions in its near abroad, particularly in Ukraine, again drew global attention. Putin's decisions to escalate conflicts, assert control, and challenge the West tested the foundations of international order. In America, Trump's continued commentary often included criticisms of U.S. policy toward Russia, framing himself as the leader who could have prevented wars. Through personal diplomacy, he insisted that his relationship with Putin had kept major conflicts at bay, contrasting his approach with that of his successors. Whether this claim was true or not, it reinforced the perception that Trump and Putin's political histories were forever bound together, each man serving as a foil for the other. The story of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin is not just about two leaders. It is also about the narratives that people build around them. Supporters of Trump crafted an image of him as the man who could strike deals with adversaries, who could tame the world through sheer force of personality. Opponents saw him as dangerously naive or compromised, a leader who weakened alliances and emboldened authoritarianism. For Putin, Trump was useful both as a potential partner and as a symbol of Western dysfunction. His rise and fall demonstrated to Moscow that America was not immune to the chaos it so often pointed to abroad. Over time, historians will sift through documents, interviews, and archives to determine the full scope of their interactions. They will ask whether Trump's admiration for Putin had any material consequences, whether Putin genuinely sought to aid Trump or merely to weaken American democracy, and whether the relationship was as significant as it often seemed in the heat of politics. For now, the story remains one of perception layered over reality, a drama that played out not only in policy rooms, but in headlines, soundbites, and press conferences. And still, the possibility lingers that this story is not finished. Trump's name continues to dominate American politics, while Putin's grip on Russia shows no signs of weakening. If circumstances align, the world may yet witness a second act in their political history, one that could reshape the narratives of the past and chart new courses for the future. For better or worse, their names will remain intertwined as long as debates about democracy, power, and leadership endure. The echoes of the Trump-Putin political relationship continued to reverberate long after the Helsinki summit and Trump's departure from the White House. It became a touchstone for debates about America's role in the world and a symbol of how personality-driven politics could reshape global perceptions. What made their history so unique was not merely what was said or done in meetings, but how each leader represented something larger to his nation and to the global audience watching them. In America, Trump came to embody a new form of populism, a rebellion against elites and institutions that many citizens felt had ignored them. He prided himself on breaking conventions, and his openness to speak favorably of Putin was part of that rebellion. It shocked the political establishment precisely because it was unthinkable for a US president to treat a Russian leader with anything other than suspicion. For decades, American presidents from both parties had framed Russia as an adversary or competitor, even during periods of attempted cooperation. Trump shattered that tradition by repeatedly suggesting that friendship was possible if only leaders were strong enough to make deals. His base often applauded this candor, seeing it as refreshing honesty, while his opponents painted it as recklessness. For Putin, the Trump years were another chapter in his long project of restoring Russia's stature. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russian leaders had wrestled with the humiliation of lost influence. Putin understood that Russia's strength could never again be measured purely by economic size. It had to be measured by political cunning, military strength, and the ability to exploit the fractures of other nations. America was his greatest rival, but also his most useful foil. Trump's unpredictability made that rivalry both more complicated and more advantageous. Where previous presidents sought to project steady leadership, Trump thrived on disruption, and disruption was something the Kremlin could use. The Mueller investigation, which consumed much of Trump's presidency, only deepened the sense of mystery around their political history. Though the special counsel did not establish that Trump conspired with Moscow, the report confirmed Russia's efforts to influence the election. This paradox: no proven collusion, but undeniable interference, fueled endless speculation. To many Americans, Trump's friendliness toward Putin looked suspicious, even if no secret conspiracy could be proven. Too many Russians. The spectacle confirmed their leader's ability to destabilize the world's most powerful democracy without firing a shot. For Putin, the chaos inside Washington was itself a victory, a demonstration that America was not the flawless model it claimed to be. Yet, for all the controversies, there were moments when their political dance seemed to hold potential for genuine cooperation. Both leaders expressed interest in arms control, counterterrorism, and economic dialogue. Trump occasionally hinted at the possibility of a grand bargain that would reset relations entirely. Such a deal never materialized, but the idea reflected Trump's instinct to see international relations as transactions, deals to be made, agreements to be struck if the right price could be found. Putin, trained in the chessboard of geopolitics, understood that international relations rarely worked that way. He was patient, calculating, and willing to wait for opportunities, whereas Trump pressed for immediate wins. The mismatch of styles limited what could be achieved. Despite this, their story fascinated the world because it seemed to symbolize larger themes of the 21st century: the rise of strongmen leaders, the erosion of old alliances, the power of media narratives, and the blurred line between perception and reality. Trump and Putin were both masters of image. Trump's image was the dealmaker, the fighter for forgotten Americans. Putin's image was the defender of Russia's pride, the man who would not bow to Western pressure. Each used their cultivated persona, not only domestically, but internationally. And when those personas collided, it created a drama that transcended ordinary diplomacy. When Biden entered office in 2021, the tone of US-Russia relations shifted immediately. Gone were the ambiguous compliments and unpredictable gestures. Biden's approach was far more traditional, cautious, critical, and grounded in long-standing distrust of Moscow. Putin adjusted accordingly, but Trump's shadow still lingered. American commentators often contrasted Biden's firm stance with Trump's more personal approach. Meanwhile, Trump himself continued to insist in speeches and interviews that if he had remained president, Russia would have acted differently on the world stage, particularly with Ukraine. This claim could not be proven or disproven, but it served to keep the Trump-Putin narrative alive. Even when Trump was out of power, inside Russia, state media had often portrayed Trump in a favorable light compared to other American leaders. They highlighted his criticism of NATO, his skepticism of international agreements, and his willingness to break with the political establishment. Yet even within Russia, there was recognition that Trump never delivered the sweeping change some had hoped for. Sanctions remained, military tensions persisted, and the broader hostility of US-Russia relations never disappeared. Putin knew well that individual leaders might shape rhetoric, but institutions, interests, and historical patterns often carried more weight than any single handshake or statement. One of the most enduring legacies of their political history is the way it blurred the boundaries between domestic and international politics. Rarely before had the personal relationship between two leaders become such a central issue within American domestic debates. Trump's political opponents used his relationship with Putin as a symbol of everything they opposed about his presidency. His supporters, conversely, saw it as proof of his willingness to stand against entrenched Washington thinking. For Putin, this blurring was advantageous. By becoming a central figure in American domestic disputes, he magnified Russia's influence far beyond what its economy or population would normally allow. As years moved forward, analysts began to reflect on what their relationship truly meant. Was it a turning point in US-Russia history, or merely a distraction from deeper trends? On one level, the relationship highlighted the possibility that old hostilities could be reconsidered. On another, it demonstrated the resilience of entrenched suspicions that dated back to the Cold War. The fact that even a president who openly admired Putin could not fundamentally alter the trajectory of US-Russia rivalry suggested that the divide was deeper than any individual leader. It was a clash of systems, values, and histories, far larger than Trump or Putin alone. And yet, there was always the possibility of a second act. Trump's continued presence in American politics meant that Putin could not entirely dismiss the chance that they might once again sit across the table as heads of state. For Putin, who thought in terms of decades rather than election cycles, the long view mattered. If Trump returned, it would be an opportunity to revisit strategies. If he did not, the memory of their relationship would still serve as a reference point for understanding American politics. Their story, in the end, was one of mirrors. Trump often saw in Putin the kind of strength he wanted to project, commanding, unafraid of critics. Putin saw in Trump a destabilizing force within the Western alliance system, someone who weakened unity simply by being himself. Each man, in his own way, served the other's purpose. Trump's compliments validated Putin's image as a global strongman. Putin's presence allowed Trump to contrast himself against a powerful adversary and to present himself as the only American leader willing to make a deal. Their relationship was not one of friendship in the ordinary sense, but of mutual utility. As historians and political scientists dissect their interactions, one lesson becomes clear: leadership, in the modern age, is as much about theater as it is about policy. The Trump-Putin history demonstrated that images, handshakes, press conferences, quote, should shape perceptions of international politics as powerfully as treaties or military maneuvers. In an era dominated by television and social media, their ability to command attention was itself a form of power. Whether that power translated into lasting change is another matter, but its impact on public imagination cannot be denied. Looking back, the political history of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin stands as a reminder that international relations are not merely abstract contests of strategy. They are also human stories, filled with personality, ambition, ego, and image. Trump and Putin will be remembered not only for the policies enacted during their overlapping years, but for the drama they created together. A drama that reflected the uncertainties of a world in transition. The tale remains unfinished, suspended between past and future, memory and speculation. Perhaps in time, new documents and revelations will clarify the extent of their interactions, shedding light on mysteries that remain unanswered. For now, their history is a mosaic of fact and perception, of meetings and myths, of realities and narratives layered upon one another. And as long as both men remain figures of influence, the story will continue to evolve, shaping how the world understands the age in which they ruled. The final act of the political history between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin rests not in the details of summits or the controversies of investigations, but in the shadow they cast on the 21st century world. By the time historians began to put their interactions into perspective, it was already clear that the Trump-Putin era was about more than personal gestures or diplomatic theatrics. It was a mirror of the changing global order, where old rules were being rewritten and the certainties of the Cold War no longer applied. Trump left the White House, insisting he had been misunderstood, that his willingness to speak positively about Putin was part of a broader strategy of strength. He argued that he alone could have prevented Russia's boldest moves in Eastern Europe, that his unpredictability would have forced Putin to hesitate. Whether this claim was true or not became a matter of endless debate. But what mattered was that Trump had reshaped the conversation. He had shown that even the most established diplomatic patterns could be broken by personality and will. For Putin, the Trump years were a calculated opportunity. They allowed him to test the resilience of American institutions, to measure how far he could push without provoking unified retaliation. The turbulence in Washington during those years, amplified by investigations, protests, and bitter divisions, served Russia's purposes. Putin understood that Russia did not need to defeat the United States in open conflict. It needed only to exploit its vulnerabilities, widen its divides, and project strength where others expected weakness. Trump, with his unpredictable style, provided both risk and reward for the Kremlin. In the years that followed, their relationship continued to live on as legend. Commentators, politicians, and citizens on both sides of the Atlantic invoked their names together, as if they were bound by an invisible thread. To some, Trump and Putin symbolized the dangers of strongmen, leaders undermining democracy and global stability. To others, they represented pragmatism and the possibility that old enmities could be challenged by sheer force of will. The duality of their story was what made it endure. It could be seen as either cautionary tale or missed opportunity, depending on one's perspective. And yet, beneath all the noise, there was something undeniably human in their political history. Two men from vastly different backgrounds, a billionaire turned populist showman, the other, a stoic ex-intelligence officer, had found themselves drawn together on the world stage. Each admired in the other qualities he believed essential for leadership. Trump admired Putin's iron grip on power. Putin admired Trump's disruptive force against the Western establishment. They were never true allies in the traditional sense, nor were they true adversaries in the Cold War sense. They were two actors performing in the same global drama, aware that the world was watching every line, every gesture, every pause. As the decades pass, their story will likely be remembered, less for concrete achievements, and more for symbolism. The handshake in Helsinki, the smiles at press conferences, the controversies in Washington. All of these will become historical snapshots of an era when the line between diplomacy and spectacle blurred. They will be taught not as examples of treaties signed or wars ended, but as moments that revealed how much personality could shape international perception in the modern age. In America, Trump's shadow continues to loom large, whether viewed as a disruptor, a populist hero, or a danger to democratic norms. His approach to Putin will remain one of the defining aspects of his presidency. In Russia, Putin's legacy will stretch far beyond his dealings with any one US president. Yet Trump provided him with a rare stage to test the strength of his narrative about Western decline. Together, their names will be linked in textbooks, documentaries, and political debates as long as the story of early 21st century geopolitics is told. And so the tale closes not with a definitive resolution, but with the acknowledgement that history is never truly finished. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin's political history will continue to echo in the halls of power, in the memories of those who lived through it, and in the interpretations of future generations. They were men of their time, controversial, polarizing, impossible to ignore. Their story is a reminder that the currents of politics are shaped not only by systems and strategies, but by the individuals who dare to stand at the center of the storm. The final word is not about deals struck or promises broken, but about legacy. Trump and Putin, in their own ways, became symbols of a world caught between the old order and the uncertain new. Their political history is a story of ambition and rivalry, of admiration and suspicion, of performance and reality. It ends where all such stories end, in the hands of history itself, which will decide whether they are remembered as cautionary figures, unlikely partners, or simply to leaders who reflected the turbulence of their age.